Good morning, everyone. My name's Josh Myers. I'm the youth and creative pastor and also in charge of the bumper videos. So, I didn't have a bumper video for this week, so you get a generic bumper video for this week, and I am going to bring it. So, glad you're here. Happy 4th of July weekend. Hope you guys had a great 4th. I love the 4th of July. It's one of my favorite holidays after Christmas and Easter. And the reason why I like 4th of July is it's somewhat nostalgic for me because this would be the holiday that my dad's side of the family would all get together, and I wouldn't see them throughout the year, so I got to see them on the 4th of July. But the biggest reason why I loved the 4th as a kid is because of blue thunder and red lightning. Now, nobody in this room knows what I'm talking about, so I'm going to tell you. Blue thunder and red lightning were my grandparents' custom-made trike motorcycle bikes. And these things in the 90s would cause your head to turn because they were bright blue and bright red, and they were loud and they were fast, and I got to ride on them. They were awesome, okay? And each year they would come, they would bring me on a faster road. And so we worked up all the way to the freeway. And it was so great. It was so exhilarating just being and with the wind whipping and just feeling that feeling. I was just like, yeah, I want to drive a motorcycle someday. I still have not drove a motorcycle, but I wanted to because it was so awesome to experience how fast and loud and watch all the heads kind of whip to look at these motorcycles. Well, unfortunately, my grandparents had to get rid of them, but 4th of July came up again, and my cousin called me and said, hey, Josh, I got a dirt bike. So that same feeling that we got on Grandma and Grandpa's trikes, we're going to get when you come over. And so I was so excited. I came over. He brings me out to his garage, and he's like, it's right there. I'm like, where? He's like, no, look down. And here sits this dirt bike that's probably about this big. I wanted to ride it, okay? I was going to see this through, so I got on, and my legs stuck out like I was a clown and looked somewhat ridiculous. But I was ready to take off. I was expecting like a really loud like, but all I got was like it was terrible, and it was just it was slow. And so I came back and I brought it to my uncle and I was like, "Why is this so slow?" I didn't know as a kid, and he said it has something called a governor switch on it. And I was like, "Well, can you take it off? Like I want to go fast." And he's like, "No, you don't understand. A governor switch sets the pace to make sure that the engine doesn't overheat and to mostly make sure that you are safe and that you are learning how to properly drive a bike." And that always stuck with me, just thinking about how there's this governor that keeps and sets a pace. And I oftentimes wonder in our busyness if we need a governor switch, if we need something to kind of set the pace of our lives. Because the truth is, we're busy. We're really busy. And you get this response all the time when you ask somebody this question, how are you doing? You hear this response, I've been busy. I'm keeping busy. It's just been a really busy week. And we keep saying it's a busy week, but it'll slow down next week. And then it never slows down next week. It's always busy. And so as I was preparing for this message and I'm praying about like, God, what do you want me to speak about? Every person that I tried to have a conversation with that day was busy. It's just fact that we are busy. 6 in 10 adults in the U.S. feel too busy to enjoy life. And 60% of Americans believe there are not enough hours in a day to complete their to-do list. First of all, that fact is astounding to me because I didn't know there was such a thing as a completed to-do list, okay? If you've completed your to-do list, I'm impressed. But this has been just kind of the storyline in our society. In the 60s, there were futurists that were actually making predictions about how we would spend our time today. And you want to know what they said? They said that we would be working 22-hour weeks for only 27 weeks a year because we'd be so advanced in technology. Is that true? No, it's completely false. Because with each advancement in technology, we've actually sacrificed more of our time and became more busy. Take, for instance, something just like sleep, okay? Going all the way back to when the light bulb was made. Sleep, humans used to get 11 hours, and then the light bulb came on, and they went from 11 to 8 hours. Then the TV came on, and we went from 8 to about 7. And then the smartphone came, and we went from 7 to about 5 or 4. Okay? We've continually decreased the amount of sleep and rest that we have. Furthermore, let's just be honest, guys. We view slowness as a bad thing. Slow is bad and fast is good. If you don't believe me, get behind a slow driver. Like, you know that slow is a bad thing. When movies are moving slow, you complain about it. You've never, ever read a restaurant review that says, I loved this restaurant, the service was so slow. Like, it just doesn't exist. We want quick. We want something here, and we want it now. And the question that we need to ask ourselves are we too busy? Is this the way that Jesus would live? With this amount of busyness. And so in my busyness, I've been asking myself, how did Jesus speak about busyness? How did Jesus teach us about busyness? And I want to explore that with you today. So if you want to grab your black Bibles, we're on page 869, or in Luke chapter 10. And as you're finding your place, I want to kind of just set up the context here of what's going on. Jesus is really busy in his ministry at this time. He's traveling from place to place, and he's finding a place to kind of land for the night. And he's going to meet two characters that you might have heard this story before. He's going to come into the house of Mary and Martha, okay? And so this is how we pick it up in verse 38. It says, now as they went on their way, that's Jesus and his disciples, Jesus entered a village, and a woman named Martha welcomed him into her home. And she had a sister called Mary who sat at the Lord's feet and listened to his teaching. But Martha was distracted with much serving. And she went up to him saying, Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to serve alone? Tell her to help me. But the Lord answered, Martha, Martha, you are anxious and troubled about many things, but one thing is necessary. Mary has chosen the good portion, which will not be taken away from her. Okay, so here's the story, and we meet two characters, Mary and Martha. Martha is busy. Mary is choosing what Jesus calls as the good portion, okay? And what we pick up from this story is Jesus trying to teach us through Martha how we should handle our busyness, or how we should maybe be questioning our busyness. And so 3 things that I want to pull out from this passage that we need to start asking ourselves. The first one is this: what is our posture towards Jesus? So Martha has a posture towards Jesus, but so does Mary. And Mary's is very clear to see. In verse 39, you see, she had a sister called Mary who sat at the Lord's feet and listened to his teaching. Now, why did she sit at the feet of Jesus? Because this was a heart posture. This was showing that you were being humbly and you were submitting to a rabbi or a teacher. You were sitting at the feet, and your focus was solely centered on Jesus. Let me ask you, how is your focus on Jesus? Are you centered on Jesus? Or do you have a time when you're centered on Jesus? Or is the phone on? Is like 10 different things going on? Or are you taking this same posture as Mary, as she sits at the feet of Jesus, ready for anything that he might say? Okay? I think about it like this. Mark's gone this week, and I'm glad he's gone. As somebody that works very closely with Mark, he works very, very hard, and I'm very, very happy to give him time off because I know how he's using his time. He's using his time to spend it with his family, to get filled with the Word of God, to pray for you, and to pray and plan for this church. And I found a great reassurance in that, and that's our pastor. But how silly would it be if it wasn't? Like if you came to Mark and you were going through something and you were having a really hard time and you said, would you just pray for me, Mark? And he said, yeah, if I can fit it into my schedule. Like you'd be taken back by that, right? Or if we were in the book of Timothy like we just were and you're like, you know, Mark, how's God speaking to you through Timothy? And he just says, I haven't had time to read it. It just sounds weird, right? It kind of takes you back because you wouldn't expect that as a pastor. Now, for us who are following Jesus, would you expect that as a Christian? To say, hey, I believe in Jesus. This is something that I value as being a follower of Jesus. But my calendar really doesn't take that same shape. It doesn't have that same posture. The question that we have to answer then is, are we a busy believer or a faithful follower? Are we a busy believer or a faithful follower? You see, Martha was still a believer in Jesus, and she was still doing a good thing, but there was a result of her being a busy believer instead of having that same posture that Mary had. And so what are Martha's results? What are the results of our busyness? So picking up in verse 40, but Martha was distracted with much serving, and she went up and said, Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to serve alone? Tell her to help me. But the Lord answered her, Martha, Martha, you are anxious and troubled about many things. So here we learn from Jesus and both from the experience of Martha that there is a result of us being busy. The first thing that we see is that Martha is distracted with much serving. You see, we can be distracted with good things, but distraction ultimately takes us away from the main thing. And the truth is that studies show that our attention span is decreasing, that our attention span is 8 seconds, that our attention span is 8 seconds, that our attention span, okay, I was just making sure I got everybody in the room, and that a goldfish's attention span is 9 seconds, okay? So goldfish now have us beat for attention, and that number continues to decrease. If you don't believe me, spend a little bit of time in youth ministry and you'll see what I'm talking about. It's really bad. We're easily distracted, and we just say, oh, we're good at multitasking. No, we're not. We're not good at multitasking. Actually, the science shows that we're good at we're actually switch tasking, which means that we're trying to figure out plans for tonight on our phone while answering an email, while talking to somebody, while doing something else. We call it multitasking because it sounds efficient. It gives us a warm fuzzy that we're being productive, but really we're switch tasking. We're just going from one thing to the other to the other. And what happens is each time we're switch tasking, we're resetting our brain and our mind and our heart towards something else. And we're not giving something our full attention. So we're distracted. And what does that distraction lead to with Martha? It says she went up to Jesus and said, Lord, do you not care that my sister left me to serve alone? And when we think about this, like Martha's kind of in the right here. Like this would be an all hands on deck kind of moment. Mary, come on, get in the kitchen. Jesus is here. We're gonna serve Jesus. Get in here. And she's so offended that Mary doesn't do that she goes and complains about it to Jesus. And there's kind of like this entitlement there that happens. And that's what happens in our busyness, is we become more entitled. And I know that we don't like this word and we don't like to admit that we're entitled. So I'm going to convict you and convict me for a second. You're entitled, and this is how I know it, okay? Go for a drive And when you are in a hurry, you are the most important person on the road, and everybody is moving slow like a turtle. If you are ahead of schedule and you're trying to kill a little bit of time, you're offended by everybody. That's like getting on your tail, right? We become that we take that entitlement form when we're busy, is like we just feel like, oh, I got to get to the next thing. This person doesn't understand. They're moving so slow. And so we just have this kind of feeling of wanting to move forward, and everybody else's schedules and to-do lists should kind of take shape around us. And what happens is that makes us feel lonely. Now, we could do a whole section here about the studies of the rise of loneliness. But our busyness does attribute to that. Because while we're so busy on our tasks and our to-do lists, we don't have time to pause for real relationship. I've said this up here before, but when somebody asks you the "how are you doing" question, and the answer isn't tired or busy, most of the time it's what? Good. And if you're good, that's great. But have you ever had somebody reply with, actually, it's been a really tough week. I've been really anxious, or something else? It kind of takes you back for a minute, because you're like, oh, okay, we're going to have a conversation now. It's not just something that like passing in the hallway kind of talk. You see, in our busyness, we don't have enough time to pause for what God might want to do in that relationship and how God might want to build that relationship. And so what does Jesus respond with? Jesus answers and says, "Martha, Martha." And now when Jesus repeats a name, usually it's in the form of a lament. So he feels sorrow. He feels bad for Martha. So he's, "Martha, Martha." For some of you, that's what this morning is. That Jesus is just saying your name twice, inviting you into this time of slowing down. Because he warns Martha. He says, "You are anxious and troubled about many things." You see, studies show that as our busyness increases, so does our anxiety. As we become more busy as a society, we have become more anxious as a society. It's because busyness is linked to elevated levels of cortisol. And this is a stress hormone that's released. And so as we become more busy, we become more stressed. As we become more stressed, we become more anxious. And then we never feel like we're accomplishing or doing enough or doing what we're supposed to be doing. And so it just leads to really bad trouble, as Jesus says. Corrie ten Boom says it like this: if the devil can't make you sin, he'll make you busy. The devil can't make you sin, he'll make you busy, because it distracts you from real relationships. It takes you away into loneliness and into anxiety and into trouble. Now, here's the thing. Martha is distracted with a good thing. You would say serving is a good thing. Hospitality is a good thing, especially when it's for Jesus, right? This is a good thing that Martha is doing, but it may not be the necessary thing. And we can be busy with really good things. We could even be busy with Christian things. But is it the right thing? Have you ever had to choose between two different things with your time and your schedule and wondering, which one do I pick? Which one do I go to? Which one do I do? What thing is important? What is the necessary thing? And that's what Jesus tells Martha. He says, "You are anxious and troubled about much, but one thing is necessary. Mary has chosen the good portion, which will not be taken away from her." So now Mary chooses the necessary thing, and Martha chooses the unnecessary thing. If we believe that we're too busy, what we need to start asking ourselves is, what is necessary? What are the things that God is calling me to do? What are the most important things that God is calling me to do in this moment? And as I started to study the necessary thing, it reminded me of this part in Jesus' ministry, because I wondered, does Jesus ever feel this way? Did Jesus ever get overwhelmed by busyness? And if you go to Mark chapter 1, we won't do it in the black Bibles, it'll be on the screen here in a second. But in Mark chapter 1, Jesus' ministry is really starting to take off. And he's doing healing after healing after healing. And it goes really, really, really late into the night. He's healing. And then this is what happens. In verse 35, stuff starts to flip in the book of Mark. It says, very early in the morning, while it was still dark, Jesus got up, left the house, and went off to a solitary place where he prayed. Simon and his companions went to look for him, and when they found them, they explained, everyone's looking for you. And every time I read this, I think of like a kid that won't leave you alone in the bathroom, like, come out, Mom, everyone's looking for you, okay? And Jesus responds like this. He says, let us go somewhere else, to the nearby villages, so I can preach there also. That is why I have come. Okay? So Jesus was doing a really good work. He was healing people. But he goes and spends time with his Father in heaven, and he gets kind of a new necessary thing that he says, I have to go do this. That is why I have come. And I think that we need to make this a regular practice for our life, to do a little bit of an inventory on our own schedules to figure out where is our time with God? How are we spending our time with God? I think about it like this. A lot of you don't know this story, but I came to Transform in 21, and I had a lot of different ministry opportunities. I was in between jobs and kind of figuring out where God might have me. And I was really excited about all of the things and that were on the table. And I was also kind of overwhelmed about them all. And so I said, I need to do this same thing that Jesus is doing here. I need to get us to a solitary place and figure out what my next step is. And so Transform, honestly, was not even on my radar at the time. But it was in that time that God kept bringing to my mind and my heart Transform and the ministry that was happening here, and Mark and Crystal and everything that was happening. And I would have not gotten that kind of marching order had it had not been for that solitary escape where I could just pray. You see, God speaks louder when the soul is quiet. God speaks louder when the soul is quiet. Is your soul quiet? Do you take the time and space to quiet all that is in your head and your heart and take a posture like Mary that is open to Jesus, to finding the necessary things? And Jesus invites us into this. He says in Matthew 11, he says, come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. What's really important about this passage, and we could spend a lot of time in this passage because this is one of Jesus's other teachings about work and busyness and rest. But one of the things that we can take away here is that we first need to come to Jesus, and he will give us rest for our souls, for our schedules, for everything. Jesus is the author of rest. From Genesis to Revelation, you can look at the creation of the world and see that God set apart one day, specifically the seventh day, for the Sabbath. And then in the 10 Commandments, there's do not, do not, do not, until we get to commandment number 4, which is you need a Sabbath. You need a day of rest. And Jesus, while he's even still healing on the Sabbath, he is showing in his life a rhythm of restfulness. Do you have that? Do you have that time that you are regularly going to Jesus in prayer, in scripture, and just spending time quieting your soul? So I know what's really hard about this is making those adjustments, is adjusting from I am so busy to I just need time with God. And so I want to give you really quick 5 practical time management tips that I've just kind of picked up over studying and over the years of trying to figure out, why am I so busy? How can I do the necessary thing? The first one is this: values shape your calendar, okay? You should make your schedule a slave to your values, not your values the other way around. Your values a slave to your schedule. Meaning, if you value a relationship with God, if you value church and serving, if you value those types of things, is it on your calendar? Is it in a regular rhythm, or does Jesus just kind of get the leftovers? Because a lot of times we'll say that we value things, but our time doesn't really reflect what we value. And so we say that we value Jesus, but we're spending more time doing sports or looking at our phones or watching TV or whatever it is. And peace can be found when our values match our calendar. Ephesians 5:15 says it like this: look carefully then how you walk, not as unwise, but as wise, making the best use of the time, because days are evil. Therefore, do not be foolish, but understand what the will of the Lord is. This is so important for us, that to make the best use of our time, it involves really shaping our calendar on our values. Number 2, schedule it in the right rhythm, okay? What this means is, for some of us, we just need to block out times like we would make an appointment or a meeting with God, okay? We just need to block out those times in our schedule so that we have that dedicated time where we're going to put the phone away, we're putting everything away, because this is my time with Jesus. And schedule it in the right rhythm, okay? Sometimes we have to experiment with when is the right time to do the right thing. I remember when shortly after I got out of high school some years ago, I wanted to work out, and I met with a trainer, and he's like, you got to work out in the morning. Morning, it's all about morning. It's all about morning. And I hate working out in the morning, okay? My body is not awake in the morning. My mind is, but my body is not. And so I didn't work out for a really long time until I started to challenge my own thinking. Why do I need to do this in the morning? So I started working out in the afternoon, and I love it. And that's my time to work out. And for you, you just need to find those times when you're in your green zone or your red zone, and you're trying to find what the right rhythm is, okay? And the way that you find that is by, number 3, take a time inventory, okay? We do budgets to see where our money is going, so do the same thing for your time. Budget your time wisely. I led a men's group for a while, and I would start out each men's group by asking the guys, what are you reading in Scripture right now? And most of the time they would just respond with, man, I just haven't had the time. And so I challenged it a little bit, and I said, okay, guys, this is what we're going to do. I want you for the next 30 days to track what you do. I don't need to know every little thing, but just enough so you can see where your time is going. The next time we met, every guy in the group said, I have time. I have time to read. I'm just not using my time wisely. And we need to be able to do that, to check where our time is going. I dare you at the end of some of your days to start checking your phone usage and see how many times you unlocked your phone and looked at your phone. It kind of gives you a yucky feeling, but it's something that we need to know. Number 4 is probably the hardest one. Say no to say yes. Every time you say yes to something, you're saying no to something else. And this is probably the hardest one for me. And so I revert back to Jesus in that story in Mark chapter 1. He said no to something that was good so he could say yes to what God was calling him to. And sometimes we need to be comfortable with just saying no. I'm sorry. I value you. I value that activity or that thing, but it's just not going to work. We need to be able to say no. And we need to be able to accept no too. That somebody may not have the time because they're spending priorities on the necessary thing. Lastly, give your time. This whole idea of give and it'll be given to you is not just for money, but I think for time too. I mean, just a question. I'm genuinely curious here. Do Sundays seem to move slower for some of you? Like sometimes you almost feel like Sunday is a longer day than the rest of the days. And I don't know why I feel this way every Sunday. It's almost like I have 2 days in one, because I feel like God has slowed me down by starting my day with worship and church and being around other believers. You see, as we give our time to God, God blesses us in that. I read somewhere this quote: "You will never regret time that you spend with God." You'll never regret time that you give to God. You'll never walk away from a time with God and say, gosh, that was just a waste of my time. I could have been doing so many other things. Give your time. Now, we can look at all 5 of these things and say, those sound like a lot of do better, try harder things. And yeah, they're a little bit of a rule of life. They're a little bit of things that we need to change in our own hearts and our own schedules to get our priorities straight and to adjust our busy lives. But we're not doing it alone. Going back to that verse that I shared earlier in Matthew 11, Jesus says, "Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." You see, as we're struggling in our busyness, and guys, I haven't figured this out either, but as we're struggling in our busyness, we can come to Jesus with that. We can come to Jesus and say, Jesus, help me find the necessary thing. Help me find time and space to spend with you. Rid me of all of these distractions and all of these things that are pulling me away from you, so I can be in your presence, and so I can figure out how to be less busy and find the necessary things. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to invite the band up, and I'm going to invite you all to stand. And I just want to take some time and space here as we close. And I want this to be just a time where we can just allow a little bit of space for God to speak, a little bit of space for God to maybe show us something or reveal something to us about our busy lives. And so would you pray with me? God, we thank you for today. We thank you for your teachings on busyness. So God, help us. Help us to slow down. Help us to start thinking of slow as a good thing. God, help us to appreciate your creation, to not take for granted the sun, the stars, the trees, the air, the birds. Help us to take in your creation, the faces of our kids, faces of those around us more than the light of a screen. God, help us to slow down, to build relationships long enough to talk and to share highs and lows and not just a passing good. God, help us to come to you for rest. Not Netflix or some app on a phone, but to come to you to find real rest. God, help us to practice regular Sabbath and rhythms of rest. Restore us. God, help us to do the necessary things that bring you the most glory. Help us to slow down, to pause, to listen, to hear you more. In Jesus' name.